Hey everybody, Mr. Regan here, and up to now you've done a lot to research this idea of iterative testing along with air resistance and how to best minimize impact force. And up to now you guys have done a lot when it comes to doing different iterative tests with our egg drop pod, whether it is when you first built it, when you were introduced to the materials, whether it was your second idea that you came up with when you had to adjust your pod based on the budget. But then we went out and we did our egg drop experiment in the stairwell, and we have collected a whole lot of data. Each one of the different egg pods that we created in all of our classes are different iterative tests, different types of pods based on the materials that we used, the budget that was available to us, and our overall goal of minimizing impact force. So today we're going to be looking at how to use that egg drop data to identify successful ways to minimize impact force and how to analyze the lab materials to improve upon our pod ideas. So let's go ahead and take a look at those next two tasks that will accomplish those two goals. In the next task, task number 9, you're going to click on this sheet to open up our egg drop data. And there are 3 sets of questions that you're looking to answer. What are all the ways you can build an egg pod to increase the time over which the collision occurs, or collision time? What are all the ways you can decrease velocity? And what are all the ways that you can decrease the mass of your pod when it is dropped? And this is where you're going to go into our data table here, and this is where the home page is going to be really helpful, and you're going to look for all of those different successful and unsuccessful results that we see here on the home page. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at not only the speed and the impact force of those successful and unsuccessful pods, but also how were they built? What were all the different ways that these people utilize their materials to do those 3 things? Okay, to increase the time over which collision occurred, to decrease the velocity, and to decrease the mass. So our job was to look through all the successful and unsuccessful pods and find all the ways that our fellow classmates, along with ourselves, looked to do those 3 things. In other words, look to affect impact force. Okay. From there, we're then going to analyze the materials, and we're going to look to figure out what works best and what doesn't work best. Okay. So for example, we're going to dive into this dock in order to analyze our materials, and you'll see that it has, there we go, a list of our materials here in the first column, the maximum amount that you could have ordered for your pod, the cost, which we're going to kind of keep in mind but not necessarily focus on right now, the size of all the individual items you could have ordered, and then the mass of those items as well. And this is where you're going to turn what you've learned about impact force and what you've learned about iterative tests, and you're going to look to figure out, based on your pod, your individual pod, what parts or features of your pod design work to minimize impact force. So what works the best, what were good ideas. Maybe those are ideas that you had that match some of those successful pods. Okay. How did your most successful features help to minimize impact force? So what did they do? Were they helpful when minimizing that mass? Were they helpful when minimizing the velocity or increasing that collision time? What did those successful features do when minimizing impact force? And then the second part is what didn't work, right? What were the things that were missing, or what were the things that you used that just simply didn't work when minimizing impact force? So again, you'll have to think about your pod. You'll have to think about how you built it. You'll have to refer back to the building materials here. And then lastly, how would you change those parts? If something was missing, what would you add on? If you used a material and there was a better one because it would help minimize mass or help minimize velocity or increase that collision time, what would you use and why? Okay, so this is where we're going to take a very specific look at not only all the ways that our pod was built to minimize impact force, but what worked based on those successful pods, what didn't work based on those unsuccessful pods. Okay, each one of the pods that we saw that were dropped is a different iterative test and can help us identify the overall best way to build a pod to protect our fragile egg, which in turn will help us figure out how to best protect our supply drop for our natural disaster victims. So Those are our two tasks, tasks 9 and 10. 9 is where we look at our egg drop data and identify all the successful ways to minimize impact force. So what were those successful pods? What were those unsuccessful pods? What did they do? Okay. Task 10 is where we look at how to analyze the lab materials to improve upon your pod ideas. So that's where you compare your pod ideas to what the material breakdown list is, to what all those other pods that were successful and unsuccessful, and identify what are those specific changes you can make to minimize impact force. Okay. So go ahead and put your X in green, yellow, or red. Reach out if you have any questions, and good luck.